All right, here's part two. So Roosevelt gets elected. Promised everybody the New Deal. So Roosevelt's administration, when he becomes president, they came with a lot of different ideas about what could possibly resolve the Great Depression, but there was no clear agenda about here's step one, here's step two, here's step three. It was more of a we have no idea what's going to solve the problem, but we're going to go to work and we're going to try anything and everything we can. So here's another quote from Roosevelt when he's talking about what they're going to do. He says, "The country needs bold, persistent experimentation. Above all, try something." And so obviously, Hoover was not doing enough and was not being creative enough. And so Roosevelt's basically saying, we're going to get creative here. And whatever we create, if it works, we keep it. If it doesn't work, we toss it to the side and we try the next thing. So he was inaugurated in March of 1933, and between March 9th and June 16th of 1933, bill after bill after bill was sent to Congress, and there were tons and tons of new programs now. 15 major new programs that were passed in order to try to resolve the economic crisis. This becomes known as the first 100 days. And Franklin Roosevelt here, becomes the president that other presidents get judged off of, because Roosevelt got a ton of stuff done in the first 100 days in office. And so every president after that since, there's always kind of been this report card. People have said, okay, the first 100 days have happened. What has the current president done? And they always analyze that and try to say, hey, this was good, this was bad. What have they done? Have they done anything? Have they gotten anything passed? Anyway, so that's nowadays when you hear about new presidents, and they always analyze in the news, here's the first 100 days and here's what's been done, because Roosevelt set the precedent there. Okay. And so this becomes known as the first New Deal, or the first wave of the New Deal. And so Roosevelt specifically did not want what are called yes men around him. He didn't want somebody that would just go, oh yes, you're so smart, you're so wonderful, everything you do is great, and yes, that's the idea that we need to do. He didn't want those people. He wanted people who disagreed with him, because if they disagreed, then we could talk it out and we could figure out. It was just, the more brains we had working on something, the better. And if they didn't agree with each other, and then they were trying to convince the president of what should be done, then he would go with whatever was the best argument and best evidence that was shown. It didn't matter. And so he had all sorts of different people in his cabinet and in his administration. Okay, because he wanted this flood of ideas, and he didn't care where they came from. Republicans, Democrats, wherever. If it was an idea that could possibly help out, let's do it. Okay. One group of people in the government's close administration group, they said that the government needs to work directly with businesses to eliminate the crisis. And so businesses, government together. All right. The second group distrusted business and said, hey, they helped get us in this mess. So they wanted the government planners to run the economy completely. Okay. And then there was a third group that said, break up trusts, dishonest business, allow competition to fuel the economy, and then use the government to regulate to make sure things are fair, more progressive ideas. Okay. And so all three of these groups were competing for Roosevelt's ear, and trying to get something done. So Roosevelt ultimately made the final calls on anything that they were going to send over to Congress, okay, and try to get Congress to pass. And almost everything got passed. I mean, there was not much opposition, because not only did the Democrats win the presidency, they also won the House and the Senate. And so President Roosevelt here, when he wanted something done, he pretty much got it, okay? So here's one program that's a big one. Farming had a big time problem during the Great Depression. Even before the Great Depression hit, they were already having problems. And then in the Midwest and out in the prairies, people had overfarmed. And then a drought hit before the Great Depression, which caused this massive dust bowl that hit. Nobody could grow anything in the Great Plains, and it was just a big fat mess. And overproduction made prices go down quite quickly. And so how can we correct this? So this guy right here was the Secretary of Agriculture, Henry Wallace, and he helped to create the Agricultural Adjustment Act, or what's called the AAA. This centered on the idea that farm prices were too low because there was an oversupply. So they're going to create scarcity. The government is going to pay farmers not to raise certain types of livestock, not to raise certain kind of crops, and to not raise or to not produce certain dairy products in order to decrease the supply and increase the amount. Now, you're thinking, well, farmers are going to have a hard time keeping their heads above water if they're not producing stuff and they're not selling stuff. So the government said, we will pay you. We will pay you not to do this so that you'll still be able to live and pay for what you need, food and clothes and all that stuff, but we'll create scarcity. Once we create the scarcity, then you guys can go back to selling, and we'll be a little bit smarter on how much we're supplying, how much supply we're putting out there in order to make prices competitive, okay? So like in the AAA, they paid farmers to kill piglets, to kill female pigs, the sows. They plowed up millions of acres of cotton, all sorts of different products in order to create scarcity. And then they used the meat from what they had slaughtered to then donate it to private charities and churches to be able to feed people. And so it was a pretty good plan as far as that's concerned. And then the Agricultural Adjustment Agency is the one that ran the whole deal and made sure that they were paying out. And if you were a farmer, you had to apply for help, and then you could get it pretty much. So over the next 2 years, there were millions of acres of land that were uncultivated. This also helped with the Dust Bowl, bringing back the fertility of the land, not farming a lot of it. And so farmers received more than $1 billion in support payments to not farm to create that scarcity. So by 1936, the surplus fell greatly and food prices were on the rise, and farmers' income increased about 50%. Not all farmers benefited from this situation, though. If you were a small farmer, or if you farmed things that weren't seen as important or valuable, then you couldn't take part in these payments, and so some of them didn't benefit very much from it. But overall, the benefit was massively great for agriculture and farming. So that's farming. The next one has to do with industry, all right? So getting manufacturing back up, getting factories going. So they created what's called the NRA, all right, or what's called the National Industrial Recovery Act in 1933. They suspended antitrust laws. They wanted people to make money in any which way they can, so they really weren't worried about monopolies that much. Government, business, and labor worked together to establish rules called codes of fair competition, to where employers would treat their workers well and pay them well, and if they made this agreement together, then they would be able to say, we're doing our part to help the economy, and they'd be able to display this blue eagle that's on the slide on their business, and people would say, hey, that business is doing their part. Let's go and patronize that business and buy from them in order to help the economy out. So the leader of this group was called Hugh Johnson. He led the National Recovery Administration. And so businesses signed their pledges, and they got these plaques with these eagles, and small businesses complained because they said big businesses benefited unfairly, that this was basically a stamp of approval from the government that they could get that benefited them, because people would go to them because they were a part of the NRA, rather than these small businesses that couldn't because they didn't qualify because they weren't big enough. Okay. Now, ultimately, a lot of people disliked the fact that labor had a part in this and that owners didn't have as much. So the efforts of the NRA were short-lived. There was no way to enforce the code. There wasn't a police force to make sure everybody was doing it. So a lot of people were dishonest. Okay. And production actually fell off. So this is one program that did not work, didn't stick, and so they just chucked it out. In fact, the Supreme Court in 1935 said it's unconstitutional because it's helping out some people and not others, and preferring some over the others. So, all right. Okay, that's it. Do your assignment. See you later. Oh, sorry. Yeah, release programs here. Do this assignment, the reading one. Sorry, I thought my thing was going to cut off on me, and it didn't.